Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. The presentation that we're going to be providing today is to help people understand what the right certification for them would be and how to choose the right certification for your data center. We're going to be focusing predominantly on the differences between TIA and Uptime, and I suppose help people understand through the presentation that's being provided why people gravitate particularly towards the TIA-942. My name is Dean Kutsia. I'm the company's Chief Operations Officer, and I'm joined today by Ms. Paige Fong, who's our Global Head of Marketing. With us today, and the person who'll be presenting to you is Dennis Volbrink. Dennis heads things up for us in EPI in Europe, and he's actually based in the Netherlands. Dennis has a lot of experience in the data center industry and comes with a strong background, particularly with regards to technical training and business development, and also provides a lot of advisory to EPI's customers. He's also very experienced when it comes to working with engineering teams and co-location providers, and has also provided a lot of advice and guidance over the years to enterprise data center customers for both EPI and prior to him joining us. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into the presentation itself. Any questions, if you could, there is a Q&A section, pop them into there and we'll address any of the questions that you've got once Dennis has completed his presentation. At the same time too, look, we'll be monitoring the chat. Please post any questions you may have there. Easier though if it's in the actual Q&A itself. Also be aware that we will be circulating the presentation deck after the event's concluded, and we do also upload the presentation to YouTube if you want to review it again or you'd like it to share it with any of your colleagues. So with that, I'd actually like to hand over now to Dennis. Dennis, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Dean. That was a great introduction. As said by Dean, my name is Dennis Volbrink. I lead the European office for EPI, and today I'm going to tell you everything about the difference between the TIA-942 and the Uptime certification for you to actually choose the right certification for your data center. Now, for those who don't really know us, EPI was founded 38 years ago in 1987. In 1999, our HQ was moved to Singapore, and from there we created 12 offices worldwide with a global network of 65 plus partners in over 60 countries and over 130 cities. Our mission is simple: protecting your interest. A commitment we've upheld for over 38 years. Every service we develop and deliver is rooted in this principle. We achieve this by making sure we hire the best in the industry, and my colleagues are not only exceptionally skilled, but also deeply passionate about their work and dedication of fulfilling this mission. When we are talking about data centers, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of business are we actually in? At its core, a data center is fundamentally about trust. Users entrust data centers with the assurance that their IT systems and applications will always be available, that their data is secure, and that the data center will constantly perform as expected. There are three vital foundations to build trust. We term them the 3 Ps: product, process, and people. The first P to refer to is product, which refers to the data center infrastructure itself. Mission-critical data centers require a robust and resilient physical infrastructure to support businesses which are typically based on standards such as the TIA-942, the ISO 22237, and many others. Once the facility has been established, operators and owners need to implement the second P, processes. Processes are required to manage this infrastructure effectively and efficiently. And the third P, maybe the P that people know us from the most, people. Competent staff is required to execute these processes to uphold the highest standard and resilience, availability, security, and performance. EPI's service offerings are built upon these foundational 3 Ps. For data center facilities, we provide auditing and certification, services covering both data center designs as well as physical facilities. For operations, we assist data centers in developing runbooks, conduct assessments, and offer audit and certifications for operational excellence based on the Data Center Operational Standard, or as we call it, the DCOS, which is a quality management framework for data center operations. And additionally, we offer a training framework covering designs, operations, migration risk, management, and compliance. Our programs are globally accredited to ensure our customers and clients receive the best expertise and certification. We think that we are well respected in the industry, and we are working with important and various institutions on a global scale. We are also working with all types of organizations globally, from hyperscalers to local co-locators, but also governmental agencies. Now, before we jump into the differences between the standards, I want to tell you a little bit more about the importance of these industry standards. Data centers are complex. Many elements are part of the infrastructure. Think about electrical and mechanical systems, but also the network, fire safety, etc. And they are getting more and more complex. We used to drive on 10 megawatt facilities. Then it moved on to 100, and now 400 to 500 megawatts is getting normal at larger sites. With this higher demands for structures that are changing, not only inside the data center rooms, but also from other aspects. Think about management, supply chain. All sorts have become more important. With all these new elements, we are moving towards uncharted territories. Customers ask us to predict the future on new aspects, like what is the best form of liquid cooling? Is it immersive? Is it detergent, spray? And how does AI change our landscape? The industry is trying to figure out what is the best way to move forward and what will happen. We are building sites that will have to last for years and years. So predicting the future is very hard, not only equipment, but also for technology. All these complexities will have to be calculated. More power is needed for all equipment, but also new chip designs that will reduce this power. So then again, data centers are very extremely complex buildings. Unfortunately, stories of downtime still hit us every period of time. This could be from operational processes, failure of equipment, but it also concludes a lot of it in the initial phases. This is the baseline before the design and build. And it could be that a certain problem has been overlooked in the initial design plans. This could be critical mistakes that will only be discovered many years later. And then again, there's a large portion of human error as well. So it's a combination of all. So, standards drive quality. It's important to set a baseline to guard the quality of these data centers. So, as you can see, there are plenty of standards that cover things like fire protection or electrical systems. So what some of these standards have done is combine all this and bundle them as a whole. In this way, data centers can be properly guided to design and build data centers. The standards in red show the most used standards in our industry. So, what are the types of standards? We need to understand this in order to think about it. From a standard development point of view, there are three standards. It's a de facto standard. This is a document. This is an undocumented, officially used everywhere. Think about the QWERTY keyboard. This is a non-ISO document, but everybody uses it globally. Then there's a formal standard written by organizations aiming to guide industries or segments. Plus there is a de jure standard. Legal codes and local regulations. Think about fire suppression and electrical codes. Formal could both be voluntary or non-voluntary, and de jure standards are not voluntary. So who writes these standards? This is called an SDO. a standards development organization. This is a group of people that develop and maintain these standards. They will retain the whole life cycle of the standard itself. The STO is being oversighted by an external party called an accreditation organization. And they will make sure that everything will go in the right way. But I'll tell you a little bit more later in the presentation. So what is the process of developing such a standard? Let's walk through it. It all starts with the initial idea that there's a problem in the industry. And we would like to do something about it to make sure that we will retain the quality and maintain in this typical element. The next step is to define a committee. That's called the technical committee. And they will make sure that the technical content is part of the standard in their view. These are technical experts out of the industry. Once this is developed, they will make sure that it is pushed into the bigger public. This is called the industry ballot. This industry ballot consists of other experts out of the market, but from various points of view. So think about user experts. And they can review the document and add their insights. This all to overlook the insights and to make sure that it is complete. After that, it's time to go through the final stages, and this is called the default ballot. And at the last step, it will be published into the bigger picture and be pushed into the world. This all is quite of a big process. The accreditation body will make sure that the SDO is a proper development cycle process. There must be openness. There must be a great balance. Not every company can join the SDO itself. It needs to be a good balance between end users, vendors, submatters, think of universities, end users, operators, etc. And all considerations must be taken seriously to make sure that the standard will be complete. There must be a consensus vote with no objections to the standard. There are processes for appeals in place when this occurs. So what happens if a document is released? Then there will be an important new party that's called the scheme owner. And normally this is the same party as the SDO. They have to put together all the requirements for matters such as auditing and certifications, and they will lay down the law about who is able to perform these audits. They will lay down the processes of auditing, reporting, appealing, etc. Plus, they also will make sure that the certificates are in place. And very often, the SDO will know what the intent is, and they will lay down the law and rules of the further processes. Accreditation bodies. They will make sure that the organizations must oversee if the standards are well implemented, and these organizations are again called an accreditation body. They have oversight over the organizations who conduct and perform these audits, usually known as AB or NAB. The first is the accreditation body, and this is overseeing the SDO itself. Then the second accreditation body takes scheme owners' guidance and will check whoever is doing the audit is following the rules. So who executes these assessments? This is called a certification body. These are audit organizations that are often referred as a registered certification body, RCB, conformity assessment body, CAB, or a CB, the certification body. They are conducting the audits on behalf of the scheme owner and under oversight of the accreditation body. So let's get more into detail about the topic of today. We are getting a lot of questions about what's the difference between these two certifications and guidelines. Plus, there are a lot of confusements in the market, and we are trying to get these out of the world. So I hope that I can bring some clarity for you today. We broke this down into different areas. Both both of these organizations have their country of origin in the USA and have been in and around for years and years. Uptime is a commercial organization. Nothing wrong with that, of course, but the TIA organization is a non-profit organization that consists of various industry experts out of the global world. Uptime is a self-written guideline, so it doesn't have an accredited standards development organization, an SDO, whereas the TIA has one. And since Uptime is a self-written guideline, they don't have an accreditation like TIA has in the form of ANSI. Let's break down the document. The latest publication of Uptime was in 2018, whereas for the TIA, we had a new revision for it last year in 2024. The change cycle for Uptime comes from market demands, where the TIA has to follow the ANSI guideline and have to change every 3 to 7 years based on their insights. The document size of Uptime is 13, whereas the TIA has 162 pages. The other criteria for Uptime are partial and TIA have full. The topology that both organizations use are more or less in the same direction. Uptime uses tiers, where TIA uses rated, and both have 1 until 4. Both are outcome-based, and the guideline or standard use is for Uptime as guideline and for TIA as standard. And of course, both of them are globally adopted. What a lot of people are not aware of is the topology. Whereas Uptime follows basically 2 topologies, electrical and mechanical. Obviously, this is the baseline and the heart of each data center. But the TIA has adopted a wider range and with 9 new topologies with it. Think about telecommunication, fire safety. So once you have decided to follow a standard, it's good to know that Uptime doesn't follow the global accreditation scheme because they follow their own guideline, whereas TIA has to follow the accreditation scheme globally. The initial design certificate for TIA is valid for 1 year. The 2 years is a validation team for Uptime, but both can be extended if needed. The facility certificate for Uptime has a lifetime validity, but the customer is responsible to indicate if changes are made that could impact their tier level. Whereas the TIA doesn't go through self-changes because they are following the ISO principles, so they need to recertify for it. Of course, both situations have up and downsides, but you have to ask yourself the question, if you are seeing a 10-year-old document on the wall, what do you want to see as a customer? Because without any changes, would it still be relevant to today's technical standard with all the changes in place nowadays? As I said, the scope of TIA is very wide. It consists of these 9 elements. More and more companies decided they want to move forward with certifying for the TIA-942. And even in some countries, it's if you want to house governmental data, it's strictly for them to follow the TIA-942 standard. TIA does recognize that different data centers have different criteria for business availability. So they have separated it into different ratings. These rated levels are similar to tier level. Rated 1 and 2 are not for very critical areas, whereas they only have the capacity available or some extra redundancy equipment, but still have a lot of single point of errors. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing, but a higher risk of interruption occurs. Rated 3 and 4 are the most common ratings for data centers. Rated 3 basically means that your data center can undergo maintenance without an interruption of your equipment or its load. Think about replacing pipes, chillers, batteries, as long as it's planned. Rated 4, also concurrent maintainable, but allows for one fault wherein the installation, for instance, your equipment will keep running with a broken chiller, and this is often used in very critical areas. Most data centers are going for the rated 3 option. But then again, to prevent any downtime, it is important to have your critical factors in place. Processes, maintenance, staff training, etc. This will make sure that you keep your downtime to the bare minimum. The variety in the TIA standard and the possibilities. We have design validation and the constructed validation. And this is applicable for containers, modular data centers, but also for products that are used within the data centers. Available TIA-942 certifications. TIA uses a lot of terms, and let's break them down. We have the DCDV, that's design validation, the DCC, this is the constructed facilities. This means that auditors have done their physical expectation of the facility. The TIA-942 ready, and typical for containers. We have the modular, this typical for containment aisle solutions, plus then again the product certifications for UPSs, generators, etc. So I hope this gave some clarity between the different organizations. Let's get down to some myth busting, because there's a lot of confusion in the market. The first one that I want to address is that the TIA-942 is an all-American standard, which can only be applied internationally, which cannot be applied internationally. No. Maybe from the early days, from the 2005, it was when it was first released, it had some USA-centric stages in it. It stated which voltage must be used, but all of this is cleared from the standard. And with the TIA-942C, it is completely written for a global purpose. Now, if you go to the EPI website, you can see a list of every data center worldwide that has adopted the TIA-942 standard. So, another misperception. The TIA-942 certification is just a paper checklist. No. Although key criteria are listed, but they are all outcome-based. What we do during the audit is come down to the facility and do the physical inspection. Comprehensive assessment of testing and commissioning scripts and results, and to ensure no risk of downtime, delays, or added cost will be there during the audit. The process also safeguards the business continuity while minimizing risk during the certification. So, what is the TIA does not certify data centers for conformity with the TIA-942. This is true because the TIA is an SDO, the Standard Development Organization. Like ISO, SDOs do not conduct certifications by themselves. This will be a violation. Instead, they rely on accredited certification bodies like EPI to perform these audits and issue certifications. TIA-942 is a certification and is more difficult to obtain than the Uptime certification. There are several ways of looking at this. Like I said before, the TIA-942 covers a broader scope, offering a more comprehensive assessment of the entire data center, which may be perceived as more challenging. But when comparing the same scope, for instance, electrical and mechanical, the TIA and Uptime apply similar outcome-based requirements. Therefore, the TIA-942 is not harder to achieve than Uptime. If your data center does not meet all requirements, the TIA-942 cannot be certified. This is simply false. Non-conformities are categorized in two ways: major and minor. And following the ISO audit principles, Certification can still be granted if no major nonconformities are found in the data center during this auditing. You can't, another misconception or confusion in the market is that you cannot use the term tier for a TIA-based data center as Uptime owns the world tier. This is not true. Uptime does not own the world tier. Uptime, you will also find these words in terms like airline loyalty cards and many other ways. However, ideally, if you use the term rated or rating when referring to the TIA-based data center. Remember, tier and rated have the same outcome objective. So if you are using the word T or rated, both can be used, but please use the word rated when referring to the TIA-942. The last myth that I want to address is that a data center cannot be certified for both Uptime and TIA-942. This is false. The outcome-based principles for Uptime and TIA-942 are equal for rated or tier levels. However, Uptime has some additional requirements for generators, mechanical infrastructures, and a few more. But these do not violate the requirements and are additional to the TIA-942. Then on the other hand, the TIA-942 has a broader scope than Uptime, but these requirements are additional to the Uptime requirements, and it does not conflict them. So both organizations and guidelines and standards can be used in your data center environment. So hopefully that gave some more clarity about the myth busting and the differences between these two organizations. Now it's time to look to the upgrade program from Uptime to TIA-942. So first of all, why would you do it? More and more companies decide to move forward and to achieve the TIA-942 standard. Let's go through some real-life reasons. First of all, there is a lack of scope. Think about if you are a telco data center and you won't audit yourself in the telecommunications. Uptime doesn't audit on that principle, whereas the TIA does. There are some credibility issues. So how do you explain that your data center is audited for only electrical and mechanical, and this does not include this telecommunications or security or architecture, site selection? Then there is the design certification, which does not match the implementation. This puts data center and your customer at risk. There is a high cost of moving from Uptime tier design to the constructed facilities. This is very costly and could be hard to justify towards the board of directors and customers itself. Plus, then there is the constructed certifications with a high risk of the constructed facilities, because the constructed certification requires live testing. If you look into the 3 upgrade options, if you have an Uptime design certification, you can upgrade this into the TIA-942 design document certification upgrade. And secondly, if you have an Uptime design, you could also certify yourself to the constructed facility according to the TIA-942. And then at the end, you have the constructed facility. This could also be upgraded to the constructed facility from TIA-942. But please note, this is not a replacement. Both organizations, standards, and guidelines can be in place at the same site. Who is eligible for this program? The data centers must have a real Uptime certificate, not just a paper stamp on the wall. It has both valid and expired certificates are acceptable for us. Uptime has 2 certification schemes, the certification for design documents and the certification for constructed facilities. Uptime design documents, certifications issued after the 1st of January, have a 2-year validity. This is more or less the same as I explained in the beginning, where the TIA has 1 year, but both can be extended. The Uptime constructed facility does not have an expiry date. It's expected from your data centers to do your own changes when they are made into your data center. Whereas the tier topology clearly states that we have to use the ISO scheme and to recertify and to have the external audits in place. Let's look into some benefits for upgrading yourself to the TI-942. Owners and operators would have an advanced and overall risk of management. There's a broader audit scope, and plus you have a more cost-effective audit and certification model. For end users and clients, you have an increased confidence in facility resilience, but also you make sure you have a better assurance of your critical workloads. Investors and boards could be a strengthened asset with value through your comprehensive accredited certifications. You have a reduced exposure and it demonstrates commitment to the best practice in government. And then facility management. It's all about risk mitigation, right? You have to look into everything. And trust is good, but checking is better. And I've used it from Edward, who has also clearly stated it in other presentations as well. But please don't forget, designs are getting very, very complicated. We are still discovering errors for the most experienced designing companies. Mistakes are easily made, and we have to reduce this. So that's why we have a good auditing certification in place. So, as we are moving towards the last part of my piece of the presentation, let's take a look at the overview of our auditing process. We will start with the initial audit. It starts with a proposal, the purchase order, NDA, the consulting agreement. We have to do some preparations where we will receive the design documents. And then it's time for the first design, the DCDV, the review of your design documents. After that, it's time to do the on-site physical facility audits. There will be an off-site analysis of the audit findings, and we will write a report. There will be corrective actions, and the customer is able to propose the fix of the gaps. There will be an evaluation and approval, plus the implementation by the customer. A very important next step is the issue of the certificate, because the data center will receive the document that is conformity of the certificate. And then again, after a few years, it's time for the certificate maintenance. You have to report changes, evaluate the impact, and recertify yourself. So this was the end of my part of the presentation. I want to thank you all for listening to me, and I believe now it's time for some questions and answers.
Thanks for that, Dennis. That was fantastic. So we have had a few questions pop through. If anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to answer them. If we don't get to them all, what we will do is respond to you afterwards, which is the typical process that we follow. So the first question that we had was from Anita. Anita wanted to know which certification is more cost effective for a mid-size or enterprise level data center. That's not a straightforward question. Generally, we find that because of the way the TIA certification process is managed, it's very similar to an ISO type approach, where it's done based on a consulting day rate, whereas with Uptime, the cost tends to be significantly higher than it would be for a TIA certification. The pricing is very much based on the size of the facility though. So how much power is being consumed, the size of the footprint and so forth. So again, though, you will find it is quite reasonable. We've got another question in here. What's the difference between Uptime TIA-942 courses? Okay, Dennis, you can answer that. What is the difference between Uptime and TIA-942 courses for individuals?
Yeah, of course we use different topologies. Our courses they are not designed by TIA, but they're designed by EPI, and they are all in accordance to this standard. So this is the red thread throughout the whole standard itself. Whereas Uptime also has individual courses based on their guidelines. Both of them are adopted on a global scale, but the main difference is that they have their own topology and way of working. You have to know that the courses made by EPI are all in accordance to the non-profit organization and not the self-written guideline, and therefore there maybe have been use of more external experts when writing them.
Perfect, thanks for that. We had another question from Renzo. He wants to know, in terms of future-proofing, which standard better accommodates AI? Look, I think with regards to AI, there's obviously some significant changes that are coming to the industry at the moment, particularly around design and operations. We're looking at different sorts of cooling standards and, how we're going to power very high density racks. I think that, the big difference between Uptime, which is a private organization, as Dennis ran you through, and the TIA SDO, is that it goes through a committee review process. So what you'll have is, as the industry is wrapping its head around how we actually should be building and designing data centers to accommodate AI workloads, the standard will evolve and adapt based on what ultimately becomes a best practice. So no one knows exactly which way this all goes in 10 years' time. But the best thing about the TIA-based approach is that obviously it's the industry having an impact on which way the standard ultimately ends up going. And again, it'll be based on a best practice approach. Enzo's asked, can Uptime or TIA accreditation reduce building and business continuity insurance premiums? Look, that's a difficult question to answer, and one you should probably have a chat with your insurance company about. But, from my perspective, I would say absolutely. At the end of the day, a lot of your risk is contract risk with service level agreements. You need to be able to guarantee a certain amount of uptime with your clients under contract. And if you're in breach of your SLA, really it comes down to what efforts you've made from your perspective as an operator to make sure that that breach wasn't a result of either an operational issue on your side or perhaps a design issue. Having a third-party audit or assessment of your data center completed is obviously beneficial, because what it shows is no different to a financial audit. You've had external, impartial, third-party assessments of your site to validate the design, and you've completed your design, your construction, and you're actually operating it according to best practice standards, and best practice standards that are recognized globally. So I think often people get a little bit caught up and they focus a bit too much on the certification specifically, but they're not looking at what benefit that certification has with regards to risk reduction, not just from a technical perspective, but also from a commercial one. So I think having a chat with your insurance agents about this and helping them to understand the benefits of certification might have an impact on your premiums, and we'd be happy to provide some support if that's a conversation you need some assistance with your insurers over. That would be no issue. Eduardo has asked, you spoke about differences between Uptime and TI about generators and HVAC. Can you list the mains? Is this about continuous cooling? We've got Edward Van Lient on the call. He's EPI's CEO. He also sits on the TIA committee. So when it comes to the really technical questions, it's best to bring the boffin in. So Edward, I'll pass that one over to you. Did you catch it fully, or would you like me to ask again?
Yeah, I saw it. So it's basically about the main difference for HVAC and generators. Big difference. And that is because Uptime basically, from an audit perspective, assumes that the generator is your main supply of energy. So that has a direct impact in that the generators have to be sized up as a continuous, full continuous generator or a prime D rated. So that has a certain capacity impact on the generator sizing, as well as, of course, on the costing itself. TA basically assumes that the energy, the main energy source is your utility supply. So in that sense, you can get away with basically standby generators, and that obviously has a lower cost factor for the implementation. Of course, you can also have standby generators as continuous generators, but again, that means oversizing. And the problem with oversizing is, of course, that from a practical point of view, your generators would run at a lower loading factor. And low load factors on generators are typically not appreciated by the generators due to all kind of technical issues like glazing on the cylinders, etc. And of course, if you upgrade your generator, let's say you have to upsize it with 30% to make it continuous, that does not just mean it's an impact on the capacity of the generator that you need to purchase, But also, of course, when you upsize the capacity, you have to upsize your distribution boards, your cabling, etc. So there's a large cost impact. From a HVAC perspective, Uptime for their audit, they take basically the last 20 years worst case weather scenario. So let's assume that in the last 20 years, you had one unfortunate day where the humidity was 90% and the temperature was 40 degrees. Then too bad, so sad. That will be your reference point in how you have to calculate, the approach temperatures on your aircon equipment. And again, it's a heavy oversizing then that might occur. TA takes it more from a practical perspective and therefore lower cost of operations and lower cost for the capex. So hope that helps.
Perfect. We also had a question from Christopher. How does the EN 5600 compare with TIA-942 and Uptime in terms of design flexibility and technical depth? Edward, I think that one's best answered by you two.
Okay. EN 5600 is pretty much like, a derivative from the TIA-942. So a lot of the things that are in the EN are basically, also in the TA, or I should say the other way around. There is a slightly different approach where the EN splits the protection portion and the availability portion. So in TIA, as you go through the rating levels 1, 2, 3, 4, the higher you go up, the higher the availability expectation as well as the protection rating. Whereas under EN, you could technically have a very high availability rating and a low, protection rating. But they pretty much align. So what you will find is that, for customers in Europe, we tend to do the combination. So we do a TIA audit as well as the EN audit. And, pretty much, don't pin me down to the number, but roughly about 90% of the criteria are pretty much, similar in terms of, the way they are laid out. So they relatively, well aligned, I would say. But you cannot say if you're TIA certified, you're 100% EN compatible or the other way around. There are some variances there.
Perfect, thanks. The next question is from Zhao. He wants to know what's the value of the Uptime certified data center from 2025? It believes will be nothing compared to Lear or TIA. Is it still worth it to get the Uptime course to certification? Look, I don't really understand the question. Zhao, if you're still there, perhaps if you want to pop it in again and make it a little clearer. I'm assuming the language might be a difficulty for us. So happy to answer the question, but just needed to be a little clearer. Anita's got a question here. For projects based in Germany, are they based on the TIA-942 or just EN 5600?
I guess I should take that one.
Yeah, go for it. EN 5600.
In Germany, the EN 5600 is quite popular compared to the TA. There are TA projects as well in Germany for some army-based projects, which obviously I can't mention really which one they are. But in general, the EN in Europe is a little bit more prominent especially in Germany and Switzerland. Yeah. But I'm not sure whether that will continue. As Dennis probably have explained, the EN 5600 now has a similarity / competitor being the ISO 22237. The EN moves a little bit quicker in terms of development at this moment still. But they always align with each other at some point. So I'm not sure how long the EN still will be alive. Obviously, it's always a part of the political arena as well in the standards arena where they might continue. But I think from an adoption point of view, it will be pretty much what it's currently now, Uptime TA. And there might be some part of the market moving towards the ISO 22237. I think slowly over time, maybe the EN 5600 customers might move to the 22237 as well. That's the general expectation and market feedback that we have so far.
We've got another question here from Nanda Kumar. He wants to know which certification is more widely accepted in hyperscale or government infrastructure projects globally and in India. I can jump into that one. So look, With regards to uptime versus TIA, particularly when it comes to government, what we're finding is that a lot of countries are actually using the TIA-942 standard as a foundation for them to release and build their own standards on top of. So we see this with China, Indonesia, Vietnam recently with their TCVN standard. They're all very closely aligned with TIA-942. And the reason for that is twofold. One, it's actually a far more comprehensive scope than uptime. So obviously from a risk perspective, it's going to be a lot more comprehensive too. At the same time too, it's a published standard that has gone through that peer review and committee process that Dennis ran you through earlier. So what that means is that it effectively is a global benchmark. And one of the reasons why we find particularly governments are leaning towards it, which means that by default, you'll find that a lot of government agencies are defaulting towards the 9422. We see it in particular markets where government is leaning heavily towards the 942. Many initially thought it was purely because of cost, but that's not the case. It's mostly because there's a published standard, and from a regulator's perspective, they can point towards a document that obviously has gone through a global peer review process too. With regards to hyperscalers, it can be a bit more of a complex issue. When you look at companies like Microsoft or Google, for example, they're not going to look to third-party certification as much as what the traditional co-location operators may have, or even government. However, it's important to remember that a lot of the traditional operators are still building out co-location for hyperscale requirements, but hyperscalers aren't their only customers. A lot of their customers are still government agencies, large enterprise clients, and they are the companies that require certification. So, if someone's consuming Amazon Web Services and it's being consumed at a particular data center, they want to know that that particular data center, wherever Amazon may be hosting, is going to be a certified facility. And you actually see it sometimes as a checklist requirement. When people are either going to tender or they're approaching particular suppliers, they want to make sure that the facility is certified. What that means for a European audience today is that while TIA-942 might not be as widely adopted as it is in some countries, perhaps in Asia, for example, you are still going to have multinationals that are looking to potentially take up capacity in your facilities, and they want to make sure that you're certified according to that particular standard. And this is a common theme that we're seeing as more and more companies are expanding globally. Their customers are also global. Making sure that you're certified to a global standard just means that you're a little bit more competitive. Some of the other questions we've got here, Lucas Vello, do we have a list of partners in each country who are able to help with the TIA audits? We do publish our partners on our website, so you can refer to the EPR website for a list of our partners. But my suggestion would be is if you have a requirement, just reach out to Dennis or anyone who's on the webinar today, and we'll gladly assist you. We'll either put you in touch directly with one of our partners if it's the best approach, or we'll be able to help you. You directly. We've got a question here from Agnes. This is a really technical one, so definitely for you, Edward. Genset feeder lines, switchboards, and other infrastructure have to match the grid size. Why do you say that increasing generator capacity to upgrade it from backup to prime, the infrastructure has to be upgraded if the load does not change?
Well, that depends really on how your configuration is, but yeah, of course, if the your design load is at a certain capacity, and that's what the rating is for, then yes, you don't have to upsize the rest of the downstream, but of course you still have to upsize your genset to match the continuous rating. So it depends on which generator you buy, because you have continuous generators at rating level, and you have standby generators that go for D rating. So it depends on how you configure that one. But yeah, sure, load doesn't go. So if you would design for a 1 megawatt load, for example, and that's how you do your breaker sizing, then that is indeed a correct statement.
Question from Patrick. I can handle this one. If my clients don't specifically ask for certification, is it still worth pursuing certification for internal benchmarking? So look, we've already covered that a bit through some of the other responses we've provided, but a classic example was the question we had about insurance a little earlier. Making sure that you've had that third-party external audit completed of your facility design, construction, operations reduces your risk. It makes sure that, whoever's designed your facilities designed it to a particular standard, that it was built according to the design that you've expected it to be constructed against, and that your facility is being operated accordingly too. So there's multiple reasons to do this beyond just the stamp on the wall. So again, if anyone's got any questions or would like to understand what that value is, we'd be more than happy to jump on a call with you separately or run you through that. I think we've got time for one more question. There's a few that came through. Any that we haven't responded to, look, we'll respond to directly over email. This one's from Mohammed. What's the difference between the TIA-942 rated 3 and Uptime Tier 3 in terms of maintainability and power path independence? But there is another that was similar. Let me just check, because I've got them coming through, some through Q&A, some through the chat.
Yeah, it's a question from Abby. What could you say about the rated and tier standard in between those 4 levels until rated 3?
Yeah, that's right. So what could you say about rated tier standards between those 4 levels, like rated 3.5? Look, there is no halfway point here. It's either 3 or 4. So with regards to both rated or tier, you're either going to be concurrently maintainable or fault tolerant. It's either or. So it's pretty black and white. It's not going to be rated 3.5. Well, there are some organizations that might have a slightly higher rating on different elements. So maybe rated 4 on telecoms and rated 3 on power or mechanical. But ultimately, the overall rating that's achieved is either going to be a 3 or 4 for either of the standards. I think that's it. There's no other questions that have come through. Well, there's a couple, but those we can respond to over emails. We've already covered some of it. This is one from Nanda Kumar as well. From a professional point of view, how does having the CTDC, CTIA compare to Uptime ATD and other certifications? Dennis, you want to have a crack at that one?
Yes, of course. Now, of course, the courses that have been provided by EPI are based on the TIA-942 standard. So the CTDC explains the intent of the standard itself. It does not go through all the technicalities, like, for instance, the CDCP or CDCS. And the CTIA provides the knowledge to become an internal auditor. So how do you prepare yourself for the actual audit that could be external? And if you compare that to ATD or the Uptime other certifications, they are based on their own guideline or standard. So that's the main difference. The intent of the CTDC and CTIA is to explain the intent of our standard, our topology, etc., and how to actually move that into your organization.
I think just to expand a little bit on that, it's important to emphasize that Uptime focuses on power and mechanical, and the TIA-942 standard has a far broader scope. So you're not just looking at power and mechanical when it comes to TIA-942. You're looking at everything from site selection and architectural design, right the way down to, facilities monitoring. So from a personal development perspective, you're going to have a far better understanding of the data center ecosystem holistically by, spending some time wrapping your head around what the TIA-942 actually consists of. So if you go through that particular training, you're going to understand the data center in far more depth and detail than someone who's just gone through the ATT, which is going to focus more on power and mechanical systems than the data center as a whole. So that's another way to look at it too. The big thing with EPI, and I often say this, we're not going to teach you how to be an engineer or an electrician. We're going to teach you the why, as opposed to the how. And it's important for you to understand that. So I hope that answers the question. That looks like everything. I don't think there's any others. Whatever we have, we'll respond over email. Look, in wrapping this up, I just want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We appreciate your time. It's not easy to peel away sometimes to attend these sorts of events. So much appreciated. We'll be sharing the presentation deck with everyone. The webinar will also be available online within the coming days. You can share it with your colleagues too. If you have any other questions or you would like to know anything else, please feel free to reach out to us. Dennis, obviously, directly in Europe. He's overseeing Europe for us, but Myself, Edward, and Paige are available to anyone too, so feel free to come to us at any stage if you need anything at all. So with that, I'd like to thank you all and say goodbye, and thanks again for attending today. Thanks,
Thank you all.
everyone. Thanks. Bye.